Hello and welcome to the podcast. It's a beautiful morning, clear blue skies, about 9 degrees, and it's the first week in November. Today I'm in Allerthorpe Forest, which is managed by Forestry England. It's fairly central on the Vale of York, near to the small market town of Pocklington. It's an absolutely gorgeous autumn morning. The forest is lovely with some tall, old pines and conifers mixed with a little bit of deciduous. The walk today is a circular one that takes me briefly through the forest and then into farmland and lanes to the village of Allerthorpe itself in a few miles, and then I turn back and mostly walk through woodland. I'll be stopping on the way back at the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust reserve known as Allerthorpe Common. It's an interesting place, not very big, but it's as the Vale of York would have been thousands of years ago before it was drained for farming. I've left the woodland now and I'm in flat farmland for as far as the eye can see, really. Walking down a little lane on the edge of a field. A tall ancient hedgerow on my left hand side and fields planted with what looks like potatoes on the right hand side. The forest is behind me now, maybe 100 yards, 200 yards, but there are some lovely old trees planted in the hedgerows. I think sometimes with flat farmland, hedgerows and trees have been the first thing to go in favour of big fields. But here they've been left and there's rows of oak trees planted amongst the hawthorn. I think I've said in earlier episodes that I'm not an expert on nature. I just have a great love of being outdoors and I'm learning all the time. And one of the things that may seem obvious to some, but I've just learnt this year, I've been keeping a closer eye on which leaves turn first in autumn, and beech seems to be one of the earliest, but oak seems to be one of the latest. Every one of these trees, and there must be 20 of them along this long hedgerow, is still in full leaf, still mostly dark green. The great fun of autumn and spring, really, watching things change. And in time you begin to realise that they're not quick seasons. It's months before the last leaf falls, and then it's probably only about 6 weeks before the first leaves start to appear. The ground here it's been raining a lot recently, and the track is damp, not wet but damp, and the soil is almost like sand. It's very silty, very good farmland, I think. Looking at the oak trees a little more closely, the leaves are turning and are falling, some curling at the edges but still green, others curling at the edges and starting to go brown, with some already on the ground, completely brown and dry, and the ground is covered in acorns. Thousands upon thousands of them crunching underfoot. This is a lovely walk in this early part of it. There isn't a great deal to see. The village of Allerthorpe, the nature reserve, but the beauty of this walk, it's a very peaceful area of Yorkshire. Now across the path are the roots from the ancient trees. It's real artwork of the fine silt, leaves, acorns, rugged tree roots cutting across the path. The field path, after passing a farm, has become a farm track. This then goes all the way to Allerthorpe, becoming one of the village roads. On the way we pass a building on the right called Waplington Hall. Go into Allerthorpe itself, past the village pub and then return. Most of my walks on the podcast will be in the county of Yorkshire, which is in the north of England, only because that's where I live. If I am anywhere else in the world or the country, I have no doubt I'll walk there also. But Yorkshire is a wonderful county. There's other parts of the UK that I enjoy being as much, and there are many beautiful parts of the country. Yorkshire, though, is what I know and where I've done most of my walking. It was historically the largest county in the UK. There was a big reorganisation in 1974 and the county was reduced in size, but the historical boundaries still exist and people don't seem to want to let go of the history that's attached to the name. It was in fact so big that it was divided into three, which I think happened around the Viking time, about 1,000 years ago. The areas were called ridings, which again I think is derived from the Norse thridding or thirding. There was the North Riding, the East Riding and the West Riding. No South Riding, that was just a TV programme in the 1970s. At the centre of the whole county and a separate entity was York, there for thousands and thousands of years, settled by ancient Britons before the Romans took over and it became Iberacum, and then the Vikings took over, became Jorvik, and now of course it's known as York. I think there have been times when it's had equal status to London. There's a lovely oak plantation on my left and arable land on my right. I just wanted to say a little bit about the geography of the county, and when I talk about the county, I talk about it in its historical setting. So it would have gone from Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire in the south. In the west it bordered Lancashire, Cumbria, Westmoreland. In the north, Durham, Northumberland. And then from the mouth of the River Tees to the mouth of the River Humber was its coastline, which was 100 miles. In the west run the Pennine Hills that start far south of Yorkshire and end far north, running as they do up the backbone of England. In the northeast of the county are the North Yorkshire Moors, southeast of the county the Yorkshire Wolds, and then running down the middle, I think it's the Vale of Mowbray in the north and the Vale of York in the south. And the Vale of York that I'm on today is maybe 30 miles across, almost completely flat, spreads between the foothills of the Pennines and the Yorkshire Wolds, and I believe in the past was a marshy, flooded, wooded area. Of course, as farming techniques improved, the land was drained, the water pumped into the major rivers in the area, and the patchwork of fields and hedgerows that we see today was formed. My point is, there are, I think, three areas remaining that show the Vale of York as it would have been thousands of years ago, and one of them is the Allerthorpe Common Nature Reserve, managed as a wet heathland, not large but completely different to the surrounding woodland and surrounding farmland. These oak trees, though, they just go on and on. Since I left the forest I must have passed 50 now at the side of the path. I've just passed Waplington Hall, set behind a very high wall in some woodland at the side of the track. There's been a settlement here since around 1086, and it was mentioned in the Domesday Book. We're about 2 miles southeast of Pocklington here. The hall has been in the same family since feudal times, and they are large areas of land in this area. I've come out into Allerthorpe village now, and I'm just walking a little way, maybe 100 yards along the road. The ploughing is directly in front of me. I turn away from the village there and head back. I've left Allerthorpe now. Quite a pretty little village with a wide grassed area running through the middle of it. The road does seem rather busy though. Now walking back towards the forest, which I can see in the distance, with a hedgerow on the left, with a water-filled ditch at the bottom of it on the right. The wind seems to be picking up now, and it is actually quite cold once you get in the breeze. I've had to put another layer on, the first time since about March. I had to put my warm underlayer on. I passed a place further back that seems to be a turf supplier's, and I think one of its fields is on the right. It's a big patchwork of areas that have been cut out for grass, and then other bits that are left that look like solitary lawns just in the middle of a field. All looks very strange. It looks quite good grass. Could do with some for my back garden. I reached a fork in the track. The right hand fork seemed to just go into the field. The left hand track took me back into the woods, walking in an area called Tank Plantation. Seems to be fairly new. Birch and some oak. The sun's to my left now, streaming through the trees, and the wind's also stopped. Now I've got back in the shelter of the woodland. From here back to the car park is probably only about 45 minutes, and when I've done this walk before I've generally just gone straight back. But it's quite a big plantation, so I think I may head off to the north side and work my way back to the car the longest route possible. It's such a lovely day, and I haven't got to be anywhere in particular. I've just passed through a gate and I'm now back in the actual Forestry England section of the woodland, the Allerthorpe Common wood. From here it's a straight path all the way back to the car, but as I said, I'm going a longer way round, so I've turned right and I think I'll follow the woodland track. And straight away the woodland is different. The last one was a birch and oak, quite new. This one feels more established and is a little more open. Much more light seems to be getting in amongst the trees. Having just put my base layer on when I was out in the fields, probably going to have to take it off again because it must be 5 or 6 degrees warmer in here than it was there. The area changes as you go through the gate into the woodland. It becomes a heathland with gorse and heather, long grasses and low birch trees with their golden leaves dotting the landscape and hanging over the paths. It's a bit of a patchwork of paths, but eventually I have managed to find myself at the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust reserve. It is lovely in here. There are paths between the clumps of heather and clumps of grass. Being careful not to tread on any wildlife or any fungus. The Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, they care for over 100 nature reserves in Yorkshire. An annual membership, although most are free to enter, annual membership is modest and goes towards conserving these lovely areas. There is an information board at the entrance to the nature reserve. Welcome to Allerthorpe Common. Did you know that Allerthorpe Common lies on an ancient landscape of river and lake sands deposited 10 to 12,000 years ago? This helped create important lowland heath, giving the site a variety of habitats, including wet and dry heath, bog, mire, grassland and woodland. Lowland heath is a threatened habitat type, with only 1% remaining in England. Our 6.5 hectare reserve is so important that it has been classified a site of special scientific interest. We have to manage the site carefully, as birch and bracken also grow in this acidic soil, and if they were left unattended they would threaten this delicate landscape. The soil here at Allerthorpe is acidic, so plants such as ling flourish, along with specialised bog mire plants, which include cotton grass, marsh cinquefoil and marsh St John's wort. Early summer is the best time to see the reserve, as the wavy hairgrass adds an atmospheric haze to the heather. When you walk around the reserve, you will see that different habitats encourage different species. We have over 200 different moths and 150 species of spider, whilst the ponds hold water beetles and attract dragonflies such as the four-spotted chaser, blue-tailed damselfly and the black darter. Birds like woodcock also favour the wet and dry heath. Probably one of the most misunderstood but amazing creatures on the reserve has to be the adder. The adder is the UK's only venomous snake and has declined over recent years. It is a discreet, shy animal which only gets upset when threatened. Look out for adders in early spring when they are easier to spot amongst the bracken and heather. After a couple of weeks they shed their skin and become an extraordinary array of colours. As the breeding season begins, you may be lucky enough to see the males battling. They do this by performing the adder dance in order to establish territory. I'm sat under a quite mature silver birch tree in the middle of the reserve. I remember sitting here a few summers back when it was quite a lot warmer. It is too late in the season, I think, for damselflies and dragonflies. I haven't seen none, and I think all the adders will be tucked up safely for the winter now. But nonetheless, it's a lovely place. It's hard to imagine that the whole of the Vale of York would have looked like this thousands of years ago. So different from what it looks now. This heathland and trees tells me on the information board as I'm leaving that it's the way they deal with the problem of invasive bracken and birch is to use grazing longhorn cattle, which I guess must be brought in for certain times of the year. After about 100 yards, the track that runs along the side of the reserve goes back into the forestry, England woodland, and the transformation is quite stark, really, from that open, light heathland where the sun shone as I sat under the birch tree. Suddenly dark green is the colour, and here the woodland's quite closely planted. There's holly, fern covering the forest floor, and it's actually more still but cooler in here. It's been lovely though today, an unremarkable walk, as I think I may have hinted at the beginning. One I did a few years ago, and I thought I'd come again and include it as a podcast. It's a different part of Yorkshire, a different feel to it, but nonetheless it's nice, peaceful, and an opportunity to soak up all that these trees have to offer. I remember this path before. It looks as if it's hardly used in places, and it zigzags its way through the trees. First time I came this way, I was convinced I was lost, but it brought me out exactly where I wanted to be. I'd forgotten how lovely this section of woodland is. It's ever so still, and the path's really narrow, and every so often there's pools of light resting on a oak tree or a birch tree. Almost back at my start point now, so I'll probably wrap things up for today. If you want to get to a quiet part of Yorkshire and lose yourself in some ancient heathland or beautiful woodland, this might be the place to come. If you've enjoyed it, and if you can, do join me next time. But for now, on this absolutely beautiful November afternoon. I'll say cheerio.